Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Right. It's a long time since I've been asked to give a talk half an hour before I'm supposed to. And I have no resources whatsoever, except this book by Tajudeen Abdul-Raheem, Speaking Truth to Power, which is on sale outside. So I thought, what would Taju think, you know? And I know, as Tony Akinola said, Taju had something for everybody. He could stand up and talk for hours in a very amusing way. Unfortunately, I don't have that talent. But I will use him to help to inform this debate about leadership in Africa. And I want to read, you know, we've been talking about the movement of the focus of Pan-Africanism away from leaders and down to the people. And I just want to read you what Taju says about that. He says, he used to write, let me tell you something about this book. This book is called Speaking Truth to Power, Selected Pan-African Postcards. And when Taju, I think he started probably about 1994, after he finished his doctorate, he used to write prolifically, as Chief Tony said, for West Africa, Africa Concord, and various newspapers. But after he finished his doctorate, he became Secretary General of the Pan African Congress, and I think that's one of his most major contributions to the Pan African movement. He organized the 7th Pan African Congress in Kampala in 1994. Right? And I mean, there were thousands. I think there were 2,000 delegates came from all over the world. I was one of the delegates from Europe. And it was a very, very inspiring moment. Right? But what was interesting was, as the Congress was ending, the genocide in Rwanda started. Right? And many of us thought, here we are talking about Pan-Africanism, and there are the leaders, you know, organizing to kill the people. And Taju took on and went. In fact, he went into Rwanda during the fighting, right? And aligned himself initially with the RPF, Kagame and the RPF, because they were going to stop the genocide. And I think I can quite safely say here that once the RPF were in power and so on, Taju realized what sort of leadership was being put in place in Rwanda and started to distance himself from Kagame. Right? So I'm not saying, you know, I think the question and the issue here is that, yes, there are bandwagons, they're not bandwagons. We have to move out and organize and to transform our political spaces. There will be revolutions, but they can be sidetracked, right? People can come in, even within Egypt, we can see how the people mobilize, but of course, you know, there are others, some external, some internal, who want the military to take over in Egypt, right? And who are worried about the actual revolution, you know, the power of the people from the ground, right? And Taju was conscious of that. He wasn't afraid. See, the title of this book was Speaking Truth to Power. He was not afraid of challenging leaders, right, irrespective of who they were. He went to the African Union, one of their meetings, and spoke. And he said, you people talk about African Union. I have difficulty getting a visa to come into Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, which is supposed to be, at the time it was the OAU, the headquarters of the OAU. But others, a European can come in free, you know, or something like that. And he actually challenged them. And I think at that time, I think the response was Ethiopia removed its visa restrictions for Africans. Because he said, this is nonsense if we're talking about African unity. All right. So this is what Taju said in one of these postcards. After 1994, Taju started to write for an online newsletter called Pambazuka News. And some of you will have know about Pambazuka. If you don't know, I suggest you go and look on the website. It comes out every Thursday. And these were called his Thursday postcards. And they were published not just online, they were also published in New Vision newspaper in Uganda, in newspapers in Zimbabwe and in Kenya and other parts. They were picked up by other parts of Africa. So a lot of people got to read Taju. And they were very, 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 very enthusiastic. He encouraged people. He was always, the other thing about him, despite the problems in Africa, he was always optimistic. Right? He always said things are going better, the way the Nigerians say. I can't say things in that way, but that was Taju. Right? Whatever the problem, things are going to get better. And we ought to, and that was critical. So these postcards, we used to look forward to them, and that's one. I think my Thursdays are not the same. Horace is trying to emulate Taju, I have to say, and he does write good ones, but they're not as funny as Taju's. There's no way. But Taju said in one of his postcards, dated 24th of November 2005. Let me see if I got. Actually, that's not the right one. Yeah, he says no. It's 21st of November 2005. He was talking about Pan-Africanism, taking Pan-Africanism to the people, and he goes on about, the banqueting hall of the Nigeria State House where they were having a meeting of the African Union, and he said actually towards the end, it is now widely recognized that Pan-Africanism needs to leave the confines of conferences and executive mansions of our leaders and become part and parcel of all our lives, building from below upwards. And he said a number of issues are clear. One, the heads of state want a union of states, while what we need is a union of people. And he said if people are at the center of the agenda, many of the contradictions and anxieties the leaders are obsessed with can be confronted together instead of dealing with them individually. Right? And then he goes on, because this was at the time when Gaddafi and others were trying to mobilize to create, pushing for Pan-African unity and more common leadership. But Taju recognized that this was going to fail. There is another one here. I haven't had a chance to find them all actually, because but there's another one where he talks about the parliament and the fact that how can they have an African parliament in Addis when in their own country, how would the governments listen to parliaments? When in their own country they don't listen to their parliaments. Their parliaments are necessarily irrelevant. So he started to say we really need to democratize. The instruments are there, and I think the speakers this morning talked about the instruments. The instruments are there. Some countries in Africa have very progressive constitution. South Africa, Namibia, other countries have as well. I think, but they're not implemented. They're not workable. Right? So how do we challenge our government to say, you claim that you're supposed to, your constitution. One article in the Constitution speaks to gender equality. So what are you doing about it? Right? All the various charters and protocols relating to civil rights and so on have all been signed by African states. But how are they implemented?